Hello YouTube, Brandon from Zoid Industries here. Back with another new episode of ZI Weekly News. This show's news segment where we cover science, sci-fi, gaming, channel updates, and more. With the intro now out of the way, let's get to the video. I meant to say articles, not video, but you know what I mean. And so, yeah, first article is the story behind Mass Effect Andromeda's troubled 5-year development. In 2012, as work on Mass Effect Act 3 came to a... Just a second, I need to adjust the font settings. For my computer, because just I'll cut here and be back with the article in just a second. Now, back to the article. Well, since I can now read it very easily. A small group of top BioWare employees huddled to talk about the next entry in the epic sci-fi franchise. Their goal, they decided, was to make a game about exploration, one that would dig into the untapped potential of the first 3 games. Instead of visiting just a few planets, they said, what if you could explore hundreds? Sounds like a pretty good idea. Yeah, that's kind of what draws me to space games. Games is the idea of you get in and you can explore or countless planets, worlds, meet whatever, you know. 5 years later, it's hard to find anyone who's ecstatic with the results. Mass Effect Andromeda, released in March 2017, disappointed even the biggest fans of BioWare's long-running series. Although some people enjoyed the game, it was widely pilloried, with critics slamming its uneven writing, frequent bugs, and meme-worthy animations. In their own review is just a corn, according to the article writer. The PS4 version of Andromeda has a 70% on Metacritic, lower than any BioWare game to date, including ill-advised Sonic Chronicles. Wow. Almost immediately, fans asked how this happened. Why was Andromeda so much worse than its predecessors? How could the revered RPG studio release such an underwhelming game? And even if the problems were a little exaggerated by the internet's strange passion for hating BioWare, something I don't subscribe to because I have no idea. I'm just starting to get into gaming. I still need to get the graphics card and stuff for the computer. How could Andromeda ship with so many animation issues? I spent the past 3 months investigating the answers to those questions, and from conversations with nearly a dozen people who worked on Mass Effect Andromeda, all of whom spoke under a condition of anonymity. God, I know how that word's pronounced. I've just never read it before. At least aloud. Because they weren't authorized to talk about the game, a consistent picture has emerged. The development of Andromeda was turbulent and troubled, marred by a director change, multiple major rescopes, and understaffed animation team, technological challenges, communication issues, politics, a compressed timeline, and brutal crunch. Well, that list certainly could lead to a game by any studio to do as bad as Mass Effect Andromeda apparently did. And that kind of attitude is sadly proliferated, if that's the right term to use there, or if not supported by modern gaming companies trying to appeal to the younger audience that are getting less patient with solving puzzles and waiting years for a game to be released. And, properly worked out. Sad fact of reality. Many games share some of these problems, but to those who worked on it, Andromeda felt unusually difficult. Well, this was a game with ambitious goals, but limited resources, and in some ways it's miraculous that BioWare shipped it at all. EA and BioWare declined to comment on this article, for this article. Mass Effect Andromeda was in development for 5 years, but by most accounts, BioWare built the bulk of the game in less than 18 months. Well, there's your problem. This is the story of what happened. The first Mass Effect, released in 2007, was critically acclaimed but hardly perfect. Fans and critics praised its character design and storytelling, yet many people hated the Mako? What? A clunky Land Rover that the player could drive to traverse planets. So BioWare doubled down on what worked, the story, the dialogue, the combat, and ditched the exploration, axing the Mako for subsequent games in the trilogy. Mass Effect 2, released in 2010, and Mass Effect 3, released in 2012. Outside of that whole ending kerfuffle, both sequels were widely loved, but the fourth Mass Effect, BioWare wanted a fresh start rather than developing Mass Effect 4 at the studio's main headquarters in Edmonton, which had made the first 3 games. BioWare decided to put its Montreal studio in charge. Sounds like a bad decision. A really bad decision. Casey Hudson, executive producer on the main trilogy, would start a new team at BioWare Edmonton to work on a brand new intellectual property, which they gave the co-named Dylan. That new IP's name, a source said, had came because Hudson and team wanted to make the Bob Dylan of video games, and one that would be referenced for years to come. Meanwhile, BioWare Montreal, which was founded in 2009 to develop downloadable content like Mass Effect 3's Omega expansion, would lead production for the new Mass Effect. In early conversations throughout 2012, a team of directors in Montreal all brainstormed ways in which to make the new Mass Effect that felt distinct. This group, which included several veteran BioWare employees, as well as Hudson, who wanted to help guide the project through its infancy, had lots of fresh ideas for a new Mass Effect. Like there'd be no Reaper threat, no Commander Shepard. They would pick a brand new area of space and start over. The goal was to go back to what Mass Effect 1 promised but failed to deliver, which was a game about exploration. And said one person who worked on the game, lots of people were like, hey, we never fully tapped the potential of the first Mass Effect. We figured out the combat, which is awesome. We figured out narrative. Let's focus on bringing back exploration. Sounds like a good idea that must have gone off the rails at some point. One early idea was to develop a prequel to Mass Effect set during the first contact wars of the series' lore, when the humans of Mass Effect's galaxy had interacted with aliens for the first time. In late 2012, Hudson asked fans if they'd prefer to see a game before or after the original trilogy. The answers were resounding. Most people wanted a sequel, not a prequel. I have to say that probably stems from the fact that the Star Wars prequels didn't do too good. And by majority of the fans, I personally liked the prequels, even if Jar Jar was a bit annoying. But, again, that's just my personal opinion, so. The feedback from the community, focus groups, and the team working on the project was the same. Said one person who worked on the game, we wanted to do a game set after the trilogy, not during or before. So BioWare changed course, ditching the prequel idea. The word contact stuck though. And that became the name for the fourth Mass Effect. For clarity, we'll refer to it as Andromeda for the rest of this story. By 2013, Mass Effect Andromeda had entered pre-production, the phase of development in which the team behind a game figures out the scope, workflow, and outline of what needs to get done. BioWare also hired a new director, Gerard Leani. I'm butchering the name, I'm sorry. Who had previously directed the Spider-Man games at Activision-owned studio Beanox. Okay, quote that says the goal was to go back to it. Yeah. I already read that, so. Lehiany, who wanted to lead the game's narrative team, came up with several ambitious ideas. One of those ideas became in the core concept of Andromeda. During the events of the Mass Effect trilogy, the galaxy's ruling Citadel Council had sent a group of colonists out to a new galaxy to find habitable planets as a contingency plan in case Commander Shepard and crew couldn't thwart the devastating Reaper attack. You, the player, would take on the role of Pathfinder, leading the quest to rebuild civilization in the Andromeda galaxy. Another of LEHIANY's ideas was that there should be hundreds of explorable planets. BioWare would use algorithms to procedurally generate each world in the game, allowing for near infinite possibilities. No Man's Sky style. Well, No Man's Sky had not yet been announced. BioWare came up with this concept separately. And apparently, they did about as well, from the sounds of things. Procedural generation is a process that leaves the creation of some of a game's content to algorithms rather than requiring each item of the game is hard-crafted, such as a technique would dramatically increase the scope of a space exploration game. It was an ambitious idea that excited many people on the Mass Effect Andromeda team. The concept sounds awesome, said a person who worked on the game. No Man's Sky with BioWare graphics and story. That sounds amazing. Throughout 2013 and 2014, Andromeda's developers played with all sorts of ideas that today sound distinctly No Man's Sky-ish. They built prototypes in which you would pilot a spacecraft ship around the galaxy, then use it to land on planets. From there, you could hop into your Nomad space rover and explore each new world, hunting for habitable terrain. Then you would go back into space and fly around some more. It was a very ambitious project, said one source. We wanted to give the feeling of really exploring space. There were some hiccups, however. One lingering question for the Andromeda team was how they could possibly implement a BioWare-caliber story in-game with procedurally generated planets. Some teams felt perceptually understaffed, and there were technological difficulties. BioWare's level designers... Oops. Hold on. I just did something accidentally. There we go. Used a tool called World Machine that could simulate erosion and build realistic mountains on each planet. But other teams had trouble figuring out how to generate high-quality worlds without getting in and doing it by hand. Unfortunately, that was the only team that was able to figure out how to do stuff more procedurally. He's a person who worked on the game. No one else had the resources. The Mass Effect Andromeda team knew they were going to run into major technical barriers with or without procedural generation. Over the past few years, one of BioWare's biggest obstacles has also become one of EA's favorite buzzwords. Frostbite, a video game engine. An engine design is a collection of software that can be reused and recycled to make games, often consisting of common features: a physics system, a graphics renderer, or a save system, and so on. In the video game industry, Frostbite is known as one of the most powerful engines out there, and one of the hardest to use. Developed by EA-owned studio DICE, Frostbite is capable of rendering gorgeous graphics and visual effects. But when BioWare first started using it, in 2011, it had never been used to make role-playing games. DICE made first-person shooters like Battlefield, and the Frostbite engine was designed solely to develop those games. When BioWare first got its hands on Frostbite, the engine wasn't capable of performing the basic functions you'd expect from a role-playing game, like managing party members or keeping track of a player's inventory. BioWare's coders had to build almost everything from scratch. Over the past few months, I've heard a great deal about Frostbite's challenges. In August of last year, I went to BioWare's Edmonton studio and interviewed many of the leads on Dragon Age Inquisition for my book, which tells the full story of that game. In short, they had a very, very hard time. By the time BioWare entered pre-production on Mass Effect Andromeda, the Dragon Age Inquisition team had built some of the tools that they'd need to make an RPG, but not all of them. Engineers on Andromeda had to design many of their own features from scratch, including their animation rig. Frostbite is wonderful for rendering and lots of things, said a person who worked on the game, but one of the key things that makes it really difficult to use is anything related to animation, because out of the box it doesn't have an animation system. Frostbite was later attached to an animation system called Ant, and that source said, but if it was full of duct-taped issues. While describing Frostbite, one top developer on Mass Effect Andromeda used the analogy of an automobile. Epic's Unreal Engine, in that developer said, is like an SUV. Capable of doing lots of things, but unable to go at crazy high speeds. The Unity engine would be a compact car, or small, weak, and easy to fit any place you'd like. Frostbite, the developer said, is a sports car, not even a sports car, a Formula One. Woo! That's a really good car. That's a race car. That's a car that you see in, like, NASCAR and stuff. Woo! When it does something well, it does it extremely well. When it doesn't do something, it really doesn't do something. Whenever you're trying to do something that fits the engine, in vehicles, for example, Frostbite handles that extremely well. Well, the developer said, but when you're building something that the engine is not made for, this is where it becomes difficult. Designing the large maps of Andromeda's planets became a struggle on Frostbite, where the maximum size of a map was initially 100 by 100 kilometers. I really don't know how the conversions, if I had those conversions and the editing software or I'm eventually going to be using to edit all this stuff, I'd put them up on the screen for you right now, but I don't have any of that right now, so. The Andromeda team needed their maps to be way bigger than that. Other struggles included the streaming system, the save system, and various action RPG mechanics that Andromeda needed in order to work. It's been painful, said a developer, The pain started with Dragon Age Inquisition and continued on with Andromeda as well. Pre-production on Mass Effect Andromeda was a tale of two cities. Several people from the team described 2013 as one of the best years of their professional lives and 2014 as one of the worst. Whereas 2013 was full of possibilities for the developers of Andromeda, 2014 was full of politics. Conflicts emerged between BioWare staffers at the company's two main studios in Edmonton and Montreal. All developers in Edmonton said they thought the game was floundering in pre-production and didn't have a strong enough vision, while developers in Montreal thought that Edmonton was trying to sabotage them, taking ideas and staff from Montreal for its own projects. Dragon Age Inquisition and Dylan. By the end of 2014, at least a dozen people had left BioWare Montreal for other studios, and it wasn't clear to the remaining staff whether those positions would be replaced. Oh, dang it. I keep... The animation team in particular was understaffed, sources said, and when people left, their positions sometimes weren't refilled. In August 2014, Casey Hudson left BioWare. And not long afterwards, Gerard Lehiany also departed, and BioWare brought in longtime Mass Effect writer Mac Walters, who was based in Edmonton, to serve as Andromeda's new creative director. Different people point to different reasons for these personal shifts, but the directional change had a massive impact on production of the game, as Lehiany had been leading the story team up until that point. When Walter first took over, he brought a new vision to the game. The Mass Effect Andromeda team was also having trouble executing the ideas they'd found so exciting just a year ago. Combat was shaping up nicely, as were the prototypes BioWare had developed for the Nomad ground vehicle, which already felt way better to drive than Mass Effect 1's crusty old Mako. But spaceflight and procedurally generated planets were causing some problems. They were creating planets, and they were able to drive around it, and the mechanics of it were there, said a person who worked on the game. I think what they were struggling with was that it was never fun. They were never able to do it in a way that's compelling. We're like, okay, now imagine doing this 100 times or 1,000 more times. Yeah. No, thank you. One person who pointed to Mass Effect who joined Mass Effect Andromeda was, just as it was leaving pre-production, recalled that at that point, BioWare Montreal's tools and pipelines weren't quite where they should have been. Typically, a game developer will spend pre-production building a vertical slice, a chunk of the game that serves as a proof of concept for what the team can accomplish, and then enter production equipped to build more levels. On Andromeda, that hadn't quite happened. Two sources said that the team had a backup plan if the procedurally generated planets didn't work out. They'd just go back to the galaxy map used in previous Mass Effect games and fill it with more or handmade planets, but as they exited pre-production, they still hadn't made a final decision. In an ideal world, you'd have one of those planets proven out so the process is repeatable. Also, a person who worked on the game, but we were still answering those questions of if we could do that type of thing. On top of that, sources said some teams didn't have the proper tools and pipelines to create the parts of the game they needed to create. I think it's universal for the game that while they said they were done with pre-production and moving into production, a lot of teams really didn't have what they needed to do their jobs, said one developer. We started to realize by summer 2015 that we had great technological prototypes, but we had doubts they would make it into the game, and said another person who worked on the game. The Andromeda team had gotten systems like Spaceflight up and running, 2 people said, but they couldn't figure out how to make those systems fun to play. I think production in reality hit hard and they had to make some really strong cuts. By the end of 2015, Mass Effect, not Math Effect, God, that would sound like a learning game. A Math Effect, like, you put it on your computer to teach your kids math when they're very young, and introduce them to gaming. Mass Effect Andromeda's leads realized that the procedural generation system wasn't working out. Flying through space and landing on randomly generated planets still seemed like a cool concept, but then many people at BioWare were looking with great interest at No Man's Sky, but they couldn't make it work, so they decided to rescope. Okay. First, word came down that they were moving from hundreds of procedurally generated planets to 30. Some of their terrain would still be generated by World Machine and the other technology they'd built. But the content would all be crafted by hand. Sometime later, the number shifted again from 30 to 7, and according to several sources, it was for some teams designing, writing, cinematics. This move led to many questions. There was that time of, what does this mean for us in the development team, said one Andromeda developer. There was a waiting period of, well, we're doing it, so what is getting cut, what's staying, who's going to work on which parts of those. I'm probably going to have to do 2 or 3 articles this week, because this is a very long one. Almost every video game goes through some sort of scope change during development as designers and artists start sacrificing their babies in order to ship the game on time. But Andromeda was unusual. Typically, a massive rescope like this would have happened during pre-productions. Developers would have time to pivot and plan things out before starting to build the game. If there's one thing that should have happened in hindsight, like the cuts that were made should have happened earlier. There said one person who worked on the game, and so there would have been less of them. I think in general, the team tried too hard to execute a game that was not doable. Many of the gameplay mechanics, like the combat, the multiplayer, the driving, were on time and proceeding smoothly. Those weren't touched by the rescope, but the content, the story, the levels, the cinematics was way behind schedule. Well, after Andromeda's messy pre-production cycle. That was a problem. Since 2009, the company called BioWare has actually been comprised of 3 studios in Edmonton, Montreal, and Austin. Both Dragon Age Inquisition and Mass Effect Andromeda were developed by people across all 3 of those studios. An initiative that the company refers to as is one BioWare. In some ways, BioWare employees say this initiative is great, and collaborating across studios can lead to some solid creative mind melding. Nice Star Trek reference. And it's far easier to recruit in Montreal and Austin than it is in Edmonton, a city best known for its obscene temperatures. There's a giant shopping mall. Explains why I didn't know any game studios were in Edmonton. But trying to collaborate across time zones can lead to some unique, frustrating challenges. People who worked on Mass Effect Andromeda say that even the most basic task would take valuable time away from production of the game. When 2 people were in Austin, 4 were in Montreal, and 3 were in Edmonton. And it could take an extra hour just to get everyone connected during a meeting, as anyone who's tried to use video conferencing software can attest. As at outsourcing studios in South Africa and Vancouver, and you got a logistical nightmare. Oh yeah, that would be a nightmare, because trying to, work together across time zones definitely is a big challenge. And on an Amino community where I roleplay, sometimes it's very hard to keep the story going, because while I may be in my time zone, one of the other players might be in, like Europe's time zone, or the East Coast of the United States time zone, or anything. Basically someplace I am not, so the time is different, and leading to major challenges continuing the story. Game development when you're all in the same building is hard enough, said a Andromeda developer. When you're spread across the globe, it's incredibly challenging. Companies like Ubisoft, known for having studios across several countries, rely upon an army of producers to organize and coordinate their work. BioWare wasn't as equipped or experienced with that sort of large-scale production. To finish Mass Effect Andromeda on time, however, BioWare didn't have a choice. As the game ramped up production and the leads realized just how far behind schedule they were. BioWare put as many people as possible on Andromeda, although some teams remained blocked for a long time. The story in particular wasn't where it needed to be, 4 sources said, and because the creative team had spent so much time talking about high-level ideas during pre-production, many of those core ideas had persisted, like the main character, Writers, Sam, the artificial intelligence that melds with Ryder, and the final sequence on Meridian. But most of the quest and dialogue needed to be designed and written. And what you see in the final game is writing that has been done in the past 2 years rather than the full 5 years of writing. I write fan fiction, and I understand the whole draw out what you're writing so it's good concept, rather than just write a whole chapter in 2 hours and hope for the best. Because yeah, that doesn't lead to good stories at all. Said a developer on the game. The writing team, writing the characters and everything, was unleashed too late, just because of too many discussions about high-level direction. And it wasn't just the writing. Almost every Andromeda developer who spoke to me for this story said the bulk of the game was developed during the final stretch from the end of 2015 to March 2017. Most of Mass Effect Andromeda was made just a year and a half in just a year and a half. By those accounts, it really wasn't until Mac Walters came on board that there was much reaction to the state of the critical path. He was really brought on board to give it direction and get it into shape. Dave said, one person who worked on the game. Before that, it was quite rudderless. Some in Montreal saw the directorial shift as Edmonton trying to take over their game. And while some at Edmonton saw it as them needing to come in and rescue it. One developer close to the project disputed that the characterization that most of the game was developed in the final 18 months, saying that most of the ideas in the final game closely resembled old early versions. Visions, not versions, sorry. A result of this backloaded development was a whole lot of nights and weekends at the office. Several people told me that the last year and a half of Andromeda was the worst crunch they've ever faced. Working on that so late was difficult, said a developer, harder than it should have been. Some said what made the crunch worse than previous Mass Effect games was what the developers called regression. On a typical video game project, the last few months are devoted to polish. It's a phase of the game in which developers can fix bugs, fine-tune mechanics, and improve existing content and to make everything feel smooth as possible. And the final months of many games turn out to be good. Andromedas say that the game gets markedly better in that short final stretch. Sorry, adjusting my shoe. You and sock. Because... Damn. Oh. Anyway, back to the article. Developers say that the game gets okay in that short final stretch. On Andromeda, however, everything just kept regressing. And we'll put something together, and it's been bug tested and signed off and approved, said we'd say, okay, we can now move on from that to the next thing. And while our backs are turned, what we just put together falls apart. Oh, that sucks. That really sucks. Yeah, stupid shoe. There we go. Yeah, this week will just be one article. Because this is getting very long. Maybe two. We'll see. No, just one. Because I don't want to take forever to upload this. Okay. The root cause of this regression could be through be tough to identify. Sometimes they were as complicated as an engineer updating a core system. Other times they were as simple as a character model changing the look of an NPC. It was draining, the developers said, because they felt like they were constantly redoing parts of the game that they thought they'd already finished. The types of problems that arise from the entire project coming together in the last year and a half really compound at the end, said one developer. This video, which I'll look into linking you guys to, even though it's linked to here on the article, well, comparing leaked footage of Andromeda from April 2016 to a final build of the game is one example of what this regression could have looked like. The downgrade in quality could have been caused by any number of factors, ranging from the lighting changing to the animations taking up too much memory, the source said. But those were the sort of problems they faced. While we've seen other games get graphical downgrades from their initial trailers to final products, Watch Dogs, The Witcher 3 being some examples of this apparently, it was unusual to feel like they were regressing this much so late in development, and that source said. The downstream teams effects, cinematics, audio, were hit the hardest during the final months of development because the entire project was behind schedule and teams were wrapping up later than they ideally should have. That just compounded even more on the downstream teams, said one person who worked on the game. There was a lingering feeling of hopelessness during those final months, developers said. Some who worked on Mass Effect Andromeda said it was the most challenging project they'd ever faced. For the last few months of the game, we spent most of our effort just trying to keep it together rather than polishing, and just trying to stay ahead of how quickly it was falling apart. In game development, it's common for the directors of a team to put together lists of the biggest risks or challenges they think they'll face. On Mass Effect Andromeda, the lead flagged several of these major risks. There was the story, there were the procedurally generated planets, and then there was the animation. Mass Effect Andromeda has been criticized for several things, but the images that we remembered most are the memes. GIFs of gorilla walks, silly faces, and the main character's eyes darting from side to side like she's watching a high-speed game of tennis. Yes, it's been subject to a great deal of speculation over the past few months, with theories ranging from naive EA bought bio, or now they're all lazy, to deranged. BioWare made all the characters ugly because they're SJWs. In reality, as is often the case in game development, there's no single explanation. Mass Effect Andromeda's animation issues were, to put it simply, the result of a game with a turbulent development cycle. Oh God. There's a GIF going on the article that shows 2007's graphics and for a character, and the 2017 graphics for the character. And it's like, oh god, why? During pre-production in 2013 and 2014, as the engineers and technical animators tried to figure out how they would handle Andromeda's animation, and they ran into several obstacles. They hired an Egyptian company called Snappers that could create beautiful facial animations, but there were lingering questions about how to implement these animations into the engine and how to scale across the whole game. And there were constant arguments over which technology to use. Some on the team wanted to use a program called Faceware, developed by EA's Capture Labs studio in Vancouver, but others argued that it wasn't good enough. Most of the lip sync in Mass Effect Andromeda, like other Mass Effect games, was handled by a common piece of software called FaceFX that can interpret sounds and automatically move characters' lips accordingly. Our source pointed to this Twitter thread by former BioWare animator Jonathan Cooper, who did not work on Andromeda but did work on previous Mass Effect games, as the most accurate description of the process. Because time denotes not every scene is equally possible. Dialogues are separated into tiered quality levels based on importance and likelihood. The lowest quality scenes may not even be touched by hand. To cover this, an algorithm is used to generate a baseline quality sequence. It's another big factor, their sources said, is that Andromeda lets you create your own character. Fans have compared Andromeda's facial animations to the likes of The Witcher 3 and Horizon Zero Dawn, but those games have predefined main characters, which makes it far easier for animators to predict exactly what their faces will look like during any given cutscene or line of dialogue. Three people who worked on the game point to one critical moment early in pre-production, when BioWare decided to switch animation programs from 3D Studio Max to Maya. I've seen some impressive stuff done with Maya, but that's for a game called Space Engineers. As far as making an actual game with it, well, we've all obviously seen what effect that could have. Now, I don't know what could happen if they actually tried to make the game correctly and everything, but yeah. Ugh. As a move that costs technical animators a great deal of work, although it was seen as a necessary overhaul by BioWare's leadership of Autodesk, the company behind both 3ds Max, 3ds Max or 3ds Max, I don't know, and Maya was recommending that game developers shift gears. The animators were upset that happened during pre-production rather than before they'd started working at all. All that technology was invalid. It's simply because we'd used a red pin instead of a blue pin. said one developer, lamenting the months of progress they lost. Later, some of Andromeda's animators wound up using 3ds Max or 3ds Max. Oh, come on, you stupid junk. X for a large chunk of their work anyway. That was hell for all the animation team, said one lead developer. That mixed with the facial animation in tech that came late, you had all the conditions to just have everything go really badly from an animation point of view. So as Mass Effect Andromeda entered production, animation became a big red flag. You have to lock all your tech in pre-production to move into production, said a developer. One that was locked was facial animation. It was flagged in 2014 as one of the major risks of the project. One critical issue, said two people who worked on the game, and was that the animation team remained understaffed throughout development. The biggest problem with the animations was manpower. I'm going to cut here to respond to that. Be back in a second. Okay, back to the article. The biggest problem with the animations was manpower, said one of these people. Well, you use motion capture for in-game stuff, but the actual work of bringing that animation into an engine is so it responds to your controls. That's not something you can motion capture. It takes people and it takes time. They had very few people. They're actually quite talented people, but if they had ridiculous schedules, then it just makes me sad to see the end result. Because the animation team remained relatively small, BioWare, like most AAA studios, outsourced a fair amount of the cinematic work in Andromeda, using studios in Russia, China, India, and other countries. This work may have been negatively affected by the game's delayed production cycle. If the story is locked and writing is locked in 18 months out, then at that point you know what the scenes are going to be. You can do up your storyboards, send that to outsourcer, and they'll send you back a finished scene, said one developer. But with the writing and design teams still working until very late in the process, that foundation shifts so much that makes it very difficult to rely on outsourcing. The animation issues we saw in Mass Effect Andromeda were the result of all of these factors, said people who worked on the game, not just one. Not long before Mass Effect Andromeda launched, BioWare sent early builds of the game to mock reviewers, as nearly every AAA game developer does in the months before their game comes out. A mock reviewer will typically offer a private, early assessment of a game, a report on its strengths and weaknesses, and predicted Metacritic range. Companies frequently make the major strategic decisions based on Metacritic scores, so it's that number that gets the most attention. When the mock reviewers came in for Mass Effect Andromeda, BioWare's leads were relieved. The Metacritic was expected to be in the low to mid-80s, according to two sources. Although Andromeda's developers knew the game wasn't perfect, they were fine with a score like that if they hit it somewhere between 80 and 85. They could use what they'd built for Andromeda to make the sequel way better. Or much like Casey Hudson and Casey's Hudson. Sorry, I was reading that as Cassie this whole time. Sorry, dude. And his team had done from Mass Effect 1 to Mass Effect 2. Then the gifts started. EA put Mass Effect Andromeda out early for EA Access users March 16th, 5 days before the game came out, which led to a weekend full of memes, anger, and haste, and nasty harassment as players shared images and GIFs of the game's many glitches, combined with the fact that 3 of the other games released in March 2017 turned out to be the all-time classics: Zelda Breath of the Wild, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Nier Automata. Oh, I didn't know that was a new game. Cool. You got a recipe for low review scores. When the Metacritic score finally settled, Mass Effect Andromeda wound up with a 70 on PS4, where it has the most reviews, far lower than those who had seen the mock reviews expected. The results were catastrophic for BioWare Montreal. While even as the team kept plugging away on patches to bug fixes that add more romance options and polish animations, their management informed the Montreal studio that it would be scaled down and that Mass Effect was going to be shelved for a while. All hopes for an Andromeda sequel were immediately dashed. EA moved many of BioWare Montreal's developers to EA Motive, I don't know, putting others on support roles for BioWare's other games, including Dylan and the next Dragon Age, internally referred to as Dragon Age 4. It's a tragic ending for a studio that set out to do something ambitious, but couldn't quite deliver. At a very high level, even though the game was in development for 5 years, said one person who worked on the game, Mass Effect Andromeda was just trying to do too much with too few resources. BioWare aimed for the stars, hundreds of procedurally generated stars, but just couldn't get there. Or like writers sang off for Andromeda, the studio's journey ended in nothing but disappointment. I might do a couple more short articles. I'm going to make sure they're short if I do. So, see you in the next article if I do. If not, we'll just be cutting to the outro. Okay? Has Microsoft just secretly announced the Xbox One Scorpio release date? Okay, and there's a video that I'll be linking you guys to, so you can watch it without going to the article. Well, using the slogan, "Feel True Power," Microsoft is teasing its E3 reveal of the next generation Project Scorpio Xbox in a set of videos. A Twitter user has gone through the videos frame by frame because really there's no way you'll ever notice these things at full speed, and discovered that the videos do a bit more than merely whet our appetites. Right? for the hugely powerful new Xbox that will be out later this year. First, a little Sony trolling seems to be going on a fun pair scene shows as the text 6 is greater than 4 on a tent, and this is presumably a reference to the compute power of Scorpio. Its 6 teraflops of claimed GPU-based number crunching power is indeed greater than the 4 teraflops found in Sony hardware. They're 50% greater, in fact. Second, even more obscure, is a string of text in an enormous crowd scene reading X10-101-317 and X01S might be a reference to the Scorpio itself. Earlier this week, a NeoGAF user found a European trademark application for a stylized S registered in the field of video game consoles, also in computer game software. Don't be shocked if S is very likely to be part of the Scorpio branding in some way. Okay. The 10 and X10 and 10S, X10S would be a big numerical upgrade over the Xbox One, though still 350 worse than the Xbox 360, so Microsoft still has plenty of catching up to do. They said the codename might offer some branding energy with the Windows 10 operating system that runs on the console. Even more radically, the 10 could be intended as binary, making this the Xbox 2 in decimal. This leaves 101317, in which looks a lot more like a date, October 13th, 2017. That would be a cool release date, even though I probably wouldn't be able to afford this console at all. Well, that's a Friday, which would be consistent with Xbox One's Friday launch. This is a little surprising, though, since Friday the 13th has come to be regarded as a particularly unlucky over the last century or two. Western superstitions around the number 13 have even led Microsoft to skip that number in past product versions. For a gaming product, though, perhaps the hint of a date-based edginess that comes from launching on such a superstitious day is a good thing. Well, that concludes this article. On to the next. Now for a brief little channel update that, depending on when this video goes live, you'll be seeing the results of later today. I'm about to start downloading screen capture software for my computer. If it works, I will be starting my first Let's Play, okay, on the channel. So keep an eye out for it. It'll either be later today or sometime tomorrow that it'll all start. Well, now to move on to the outro. Please, well, this concludes this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. I know it's probably a bit long, so if you stuck around to this point, please do that for me. Well, see you on the battlefield.